What's up, y'all? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. We had a few technical difficulties starting out, but hopefully you guys can hear us and see us now. How's everyone doing? We got a ton of people on to start us off. We got Brian, Chris, Timo, Steven, Mike, Brent, Cody, Ron, ton of other people. How's it going, guys? Randy, how you doing tonight?
Oh, doing good, man. Johnny, it's been a long day for both of us. I was up this morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, drove down to Beaver Lake. We did our challenge today, drove back, got the kids at daycare, down here in the live cast now, and just that it's what we do to put out quality content for everybody. We just working 24/7 here.
That's the way we do it, and we appreciate everyone joining in and enjoying the stream. So today we're going to be talking about the best fall areas on dirty water lakes. This means water visibility between, let's say, 3 foot of visibility or less, like 0 to 3 foot of visibility range. This is going to be lakes that are going to be usually shallower lakes. You're not going to have as many offshore opportunities potentially, but there's still going to be some offshore fish, and they're going to skew a little more shallow. So, Randy, you're going to do a lot of the heavy lifting tonight, I think, talking about these shallow waterfall areas and these dirty water lakes, but I have a few tricks up my sleeve too on the offshore stuff that we'll talk about as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, in before we get into that and we let a few more people get on the stream, a couple of things I want to call out. First is that we are going to be giving away a $100 prize pack at the end of this live stream if we can hit 700 concurrent viewers. 700 viewers at one time on the live stream. We hit 600 last week and gave away a $100 prize pack. And this is a prize pack full of baits. We're going to be doing Bridgeford beef jerky, some other cool tackle that's in there. And so if you guys want that prize pack and want to be eligible for that, then share out this live stream on Facebook, on Instagram, on, I don't know, text your friends. It doesn't really matter. We just need 700 people watching this live stream. We'll be going for about an hour and a half here, hour and 15 minutes. And if we have 700 on at the same time by the end of the stream, then we are going to give away that $100 prize pack. So, anyways, that's what we're going to do today. And appreciate JV Basson giving us the $4.99 super chat. Thanks for taking the time out of your days to help the fishing community. Much love from Indiana. Appreciate that. Awesome. Well, what we want to do too before we start out talking about the dirty water lakes is give you guys insight on the other side of bass fishing. We always talk about our successes and how Randy and I are catching fish, shallow versus offshore. We don't normally have that many bad days, so we don't really talk about them that much. But today we had one of those days that was absolutely awful. Would you agree, Randy?
Yeah, it was a challenge to say the least. We won't give away too much on there, but we had a day it was just bluebird skies, not a cloud anywhere, no wind. It was challenging to say the least out there.
Yeah, and let me kind of give you guys just a high-level idea of what we dealt with today. We were on Beaver Lake, Northwest Arkansas. This lake is a pretty tough lake in general. And what happened is that we were dealing, like Randy said, bluebird skies, falling water. They were pulling the water down to winter pool, and we also had that lake turnover. And Randy and I actually ended up fishing in the exact same section of the lake, kind of this lower mid-lake section where you see the water getting a little bit clearer. So we had anywhere from maybe 4 to 7 foot of visibility. I actually made it all the way up closer to the dam as well. And I was fishing offshore, Randy was fishing up shallow. And neither of us caught very many fish, and we're not going to get into all the details. But one thing I want to make sure is very clear at the beginning of the stream is that all the areas we talk about in this live stream, as well as all the past live streams that we've talked about, they may be the proper areas to be in, but that doesn't mean that you're in the proper section of the lake to fish those areas. For example, Randy and I are in this section of Beaver Lake today, that mid-lower section of the lake, and we did not catch anything. But if we had been fishing the exact same strategies in a different part of the lake, let's say the lower part of the lake that's a lot dirtier, or way up by the dam, we may have caught them a lot better. And that's something that you really have to take into account when you're fishing in the fall, is that a lot of times the area of the lake, the section of the lake that you're fishing, let's say the 1 or 2 or 3 mile stretch you should decide to launch your boat in, that can have a bigger impact on your fishing success than the actual specific spots you're fishing, the points, the humps, the ledges, whatever you're fishing. Would you agree with that, Randy?
Yeah, and that's even more important if you're fishing water visibility that's like over 3 foot, because for like every foot you gain in clarity over 3 feet, the weather becomes more critical in the fall time of the year. And Beaver Lake is like it's like the perfect example of that. The fish on Beaver Lake in those Clearwater Ozark impoundments, they are so weather sensitive in the fall time as far as areas of the lake that light up or areas of the lake that get tough. And conversely, tonight's topic, fall fishing on stained water lakes, the weather does not have that as much of an impact. So it'll be an interesting comparison between the two.
For sure. And just a couple comments here. One from Nathan. He asked, do you ever do any offshore fishing videos? Yes, we do a lot of offshore fishing videos. That's actually what the channel was known for before I brought Randy on. I actually just posted a brand new video yesterday about the complete process of fishing offshore step by step, from how to look at a contour line map, how to graph offshore areas, how to pick offshore areas, how to cast on the spots, how to catch the fish, how to choose your baits, all of that. And it kind of gives you a general overview of all of the videos I made on that as well, and it's a really good summary of how to fish offshore. So if you do want to learn how to fish offshore, that is the number one video you can watch to get a full understanding, or at least a high level understanding. And then I link a ton of videos. I've made probably 150 videos about offshore bass fishing on this channel with detailed graphics, navionics, sonar recordings, everything you'll need to know about offshore fishing. So definitely check out the videos there. So, Randy, let's then jump over to the main topic for the day, which is the best fall areas on dirty water lakes. And for our dirty water lake today, we're actually going to be using Lake Eufaula in Alabama. Lake Eufaula is definitely what I would consider a dirtier water lake. It's not necessarily a super dirty water lake from end to end, but it does have a good stain to it. And you can see Randy's got it pulled up there. I'm actually going to pull it up over here too on Google Earth for you guys, just to give you an idea of what it looks like from a water clarity perspective. Lake Eufaula is a pretty big lake. On the lower end down by the dam, you might have a maximum of 3 foot of visibility, especially in the fall as that water's falling and stuff. In the summer, if there's like no rain or current, you might get it up to 4 or 5 foot of visibility on the lower end. But in general, I'd say it's like more in that 2.5 to 4 foot range. And then if we move up the lake to the mid-lake section, you have even more stained water, 1 foot to 2 foot. And then if you get back up to the very northern section, you're dealing with 6 inches to 1 foot of visibility. This is what we classify as a dirty water lake. So, Randy, walk us through your top shallow water areas on a lake like Eufaula in the fall.
Okay, yeah, Johnny, I fished a ton of tournaments on Eufaula over the past 30 years, so I'm really familiar with it, and it's really it's a great example because the places that we talk about on Lake Eufaula tonight, excuse me, anglers are going to be able to duplicate that on their own home bodies of water if they have comparable water clarities. So basically on Eufaula, what you have here is just like what you're talking about. The clarities really vary with some different things, like how much water's coming to the lake. If it, excuse me, guys, if the water, if it's had much runoff or anything like that. But in general, just like Johnny said, in the lower end in this portion down here, you're going to have 2 to 3 foot of visibility. And the mid part of the lake, which I consider up here, sort of around the bridges area and the Cowicky Creek area here, you got anywhere between 6 inches to maybe 1 foot of visibility, depending where you're at. And then the farther you get up the river, next, towards the dam all the way up here, again, it varies anywhere between 6 inches to 1 foot. Sometimes the main river, as you get farther up, gets a little bit clearer, but some of the creeks up here, maintain their stain on there. Now, on a lake like Eufaula, you've got a couple more variables than you do on a lot of traditional lakes, because Eufaula, there's quite a bit of bank grass on it. There's this stuff called the alligator grass, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's sort of like a shallow, viney looking grass with leaves on it. And then you have water willows, lots of really good cover all over the lake. And that throws another variable in for fall fishing, because that emergent shallow bank grass on Lake Eufaula or any lake that has that will hold bass all during the fall. But for me personally, this time of year, I always begin back in the creeks, because there's always a catchable population of fish in the fall in the creeks, especially if the water is a little bit lower. Um, it just seems like this is the time of year if you're going to catch quality fish, that's where I go. So let me give you an example of what I'm looking for here. This is Cowicky Creek, which is probably the most famous creek on the lake. Right here at the bridge, this is where most of the tournaments go out of the lake. So there's a lot of fish released in this particular area here. Now, one of my favorite areas on Lake Eufaula is this Cowicky Creek itself, way back up in the creek. And if I can zoom out here, you've got the creek actually has some flats like most creeks do towards the first third of them. And then like a lot of creeks across the country, it turns into the old channel in a certain distance. Now, what you have in here is this old channel. It goes back for probably 3 or 4 miles at least, way back in here. It keeps going and going. And eventually what you have is you gradually start to lose depth in the middle of the channel. So the way that I go about approaching this, I'll zoom out so you can see the whole length of it here. In the fall time of the year, from September to November, what I'll do is I go to the back of these major creeks and I'll run all the way to the very back of them, because I run, I idle, look around a little bit. I want to see how deep the channel depth is in the middle. I want to study any available shoreline cover. And once I get to the back where I have like 5 foot of water in the middle of the channel, that's where I stop fishing. Because one of the things I found out in the backs of these creeks in dirty water lakes is once you hit 5 foot in the very back of these things, you there are some bass back there, but you lose your groups of fish like you have in deeper water. So when I hit 5 feet, I turn the boat around and I begin fishing my way out. And this is a slow, methodical process, because what happens is I'll fish for maybe like a half a mile, and if I don't get a bite, I'll idle the boat up another quarter mile and begin fishing. But what I'm looking for is every one of these creeks like this, there's always a certain section of the creek that has some activity or life. Sometimes it's the first part of it where it gets into the old channel. Sometimes it's the mid part, and sometimes it's the back. So the only way that you can really figure out is to fish through these particular areas to really find out, the portion of the creek that the fish are using. Most of the time, it's been my experience, and I've won several tournaments in this type of water. This is this perfect example when I won the Bassmaster Top 150 at the Mobile Delta. The creek was just like this. I was fishing, and those particular fish were 2/3 of the way back in. And this is the sweet spot right here. When you get 2/3 of the way back in, when that water temperature is around, 65 to low 70s, this is the area that those bass really like to use right here. And everything is like target oriented. You're dealing with overhanging trees, stumps, lay down timber, any rock transition. If there's stuff in there, they use everything and they'll use all of it. But I guess the biggest tip that I can give people on this is avoid the flat part of the creek in here. This is the part of the creek that gets the most pressure right here. That is the area of the creek before it turns into the channel. Because the reason you don't get as many people back in the creek itself like this is everything looks the same. You've got maybe 10 miles of creek that just is identical, and you can fish through there and you can fish for a mile and not get a bite. And a lot of people give up on that. But the real diehard shallow water creek anglers like myself know that it's just a matter of locating, the key sweet spots in those creeks.
That's some good stuff right there. That's some really good stuff. That's something I have done in the past on Lake Dardanelle, actually, which is another shallow, dirty water lake. Maybe not as successfully, because I may have just not gone as far back in there as I needed to go, so that's really good stuff there. One wrinkle in this, Randy, is that the guys are saying who actually fish Lake Eufaula that it's down 5 feet right now for their work on the dam, so the lake is 5 feet low. How would that affect your shallow water strategy on this lake?
Well, the lower the better for me. I love the water low when you're fishing these creeks this time of year. The only problem is a lot of times you have some access problems, because what you have in most lakes, since most of our lakes are anywhere between 40 to 80 years old, you have a lot of siltation back in these areas before it gets into the old channel. And a lot of times you can't get back in here. It's simply sealed it in, and you can't get back in there in the low water deal. But if you can access these areas, that's even that much better. Now, say for example that if you can't access that, then you ask, okay, what other options do we have here? Now, every lake is going to have, structure and cover unique to itself. I mean, so every lake's got, like Eufaula, we talked about the shallow grass, and some lakes it's just rock, some like it's standing timber. But the creeks, like I said, and the number one thing I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to be able to find my way to get back in those particular creeks. But if the water's really low, like it is, abnormal, 5 feet is way low. Eufaula, I can imagine. I guess at that level, I'd be curious to know from the locals down there if there's still a lot of bank grass when the water's
They
that
said
low.
there's no grass left.
Okay, that throws a different wrinkle into it. In that particular case, the thing that I would do is I go up the river, and let me scroll out here. Eufaula has one of the best river sections of any lake that I've ever fished. Let me scroll in here a little bit. This is one of the areas I really like. If anyone fishes Eufaula, they know this area here. This is a really good area at certain times of the year. But the area that I really like at Eufaula, if the water is low like this, is the actual main river channel itself, above the river bend area. And what you have here is this goes on forever, and there's like the riverbank is like isolated laydowns. There's stumps. The water's a little bit clearer on the main river up there. And what you'll have on there is you'll run up this river, and there may be a laydown here, and then 50 feet up there may be one stump, and then another 100 yards up there may be a blowdown tree. There's not like a ton of cover, but there's enough stuff where you can run up here and just hit every single piece of isolated wood all the way up the river on both sides of it. Not only above the river bend area, but below as well is really good. Gary Klein and I did really good in a Bassmaster tournament up here, way up the river one time, flipping a jig on these isolated laydowns. And the farther you get up, that it cleans up a little bit more. And on Eufaula is a little bit unique because when you get up here close to the next dam, up by Columbus, Phoenix City, you've got a lot of like riprap banks up here, a lot of current, and they actually catch a lot of big spotted bass way up here just on the riprap banks, current eddies, that type of breaks. But if the water's low like it is at Eufaula right now, like I said, I'm on the main river up here fishing isolated targets with a jig or a creature bait. One of the things that you'll find when you're fishing the upper river section that's got cleaner water than it does down the lake, in the fall time of the year, a slow bait is better than a fast bait. A moving bait is always better if you have water visibilities like in that, 8 inches to 18 inches. But when you get some visibilities like you have on the main channel here down to 3 feet, that's when I found, a jig or a creature bait in and around the whatever visible cover you have is an excellent technique.
So this is really interesting to me too, because if you look at this lake, whenever I think about fishing a lake, I want to fish the lake. If you zoom out, Randy, and show like where you are relative to the rest of Eufaula, you are on the narrowest, skinniest part. Like most people wouldn't even think about looking at, like if you look at the outline of Lake Eufaula, you're up there. That looks to me like it might just be like a random little river or creek or stream. You have that whole lake south of you, which is so fascinating.
I'll tell you guys a little story about how many big fish are up here. That tournament that Gary Klein and I fished, that Gary and I did both. Gary won the tournament actually up here. And the first day of the tournament, I run up here in this area above Riverbend. The first bite I got that morning, it was a 713 on flipping a jig on a laydown. And then I catch another 7-pounder about 20 minutes later. So it's 8 o'clock in the morning, and I've got a 713 and a 7 in the boat.
Oh my
I
God.
proceeded the next 6 or 7 hours. I lost 4 other big ones flipping a jig on stumps up here. Big ones that I saw that got up under the water. I had 2 fish that weighed almost 15 pounds and lost 4 other big ones. I'd have had one of those mega bags from unbelievable up here. But like I said, Gary won the tournament flipping a jig. up in this area here too. So the big ones live up here. You're not just fishing for little spotted bass.
Yeah, that's crazy, and that's something I think a lot of guys have to take into account too when they're on their lake. Is there a good population of better fish up the rivers? Because like on Eufaula, that's definitely a viable approach, but maybe on other lakes it might not be as viable. But I know like on Lake Dardanelle, where I grew up fishing and kind of in my home lakes, you can catch them way up the river that this time of year. That's like one of the better places to catch them is way up the river and kind of getting out of the main lake section, especially if you want to fish down the bank, fish up shallow.
Yeah, and river fishing in the fall time, like I said, it's really water clarity sensitive because the clarity sometimes will not only dictate how productive it is, but it dictates the techniques. It dictates time of day that is real good. So every river is unique to itself and how productive it is this time of year. But one thing remains true that I can tell you for sure is when you're fishing the backs of creeks and when you're fishing the river arms in a lake in the fall, this time of year, low water is your friend. You want the lower the better. You want those fish to pull in on any cover that's remaining. It makes it so much easier to fish, and it just seems like it turns the bite on when the water's lower.
That's awesome. So, that's really good. One question Rob was asking: what time of year was that tournament, Randy, where you caught the 2.7s?
That was a early March, I believe, or late February tournament.
Gotcha. So that was a fall. I remember that tournament actually. Gary Klein was using a rattleback jig with a Sartreuse grub on the shank of the hook, and he was putting and he was flipping. I know that tournament, Randy.
Good memory.
I have a good memory of that.
The problem I had in that tournament, that was the first tournament that I realized that you can't slack set on a jig with a bass because those big ones that I lost, after I caught the two giant ones, every one of them, I think when I slack set the hook on every one of them, flipping stumps on 30-pound test line, and they'd be smoking to the boat just under the surface. And the backs would be like 4 inches wide. I saw these big giant bass. And they'd swim out to the middle of the river and just pull off. I think they just opened their mouth. I didn't even get the hook in them. But, God, that was a hard one to take, man.
That's rough.
It brings back some bad memories.
Oh, no. Well, I'm going to jump over here and start talking about some offshore fishing. But before we do that, I'm going to take a quick break with you guys. And we're going to talk a little bit about some stuff we have on fishmoment.com. We always do this. Also, just want to remind you guys that we're going to be giving away a $100 prize pack of fishing lures if we can get 700 people watching this live stream. We hit like 604 last week. And so if you guys like the live stream and you feel like your friends would like it as well, share it out on Facebook, share it out on social media. If we can get up to 700 viewers on this live stream, we'll be giving away a $100 prize pack of fishing lures, and we'll be picking people who are watching the stream right now while my team do that. So definitely share out the live stream if you guys are enjoying. And then we're also going to quickly just jump over to actually, let me pull this up here. Give me 1 second. Need to pull up stuff. We were coming hot from the lake, guys, so apologize. We're a little bit out of whack today. But on fishmoment.com, we have a few things we just want to talk to you guys about. First up, some virtual seminars that we're offering. I am offering an advanced offshore bass fishing class on October 22nd. I think there's like 4 spots available for this still. And I just posted a video about the step-by-step process of finding offshore bass. And you can check that out on the Fish Moment YouTube channel. And if you felt like that video was pretty basic or you felt like you understood all the concepts there, then this advanced offshore bass fishing class is the class for you. I'll teach you how to become a more efficient and effective offshore angler by determining the best feeding windows for bass, how weather conditions affect how the offshore fish are biting, what sections of the lake are best for offshore fishing, how to determine which sections are best. Also, how to find areas that other anglers aren't fishing, those sneaky holes that you might hear like Jacob Wheeler and those guys talking about, and also how to maximize community holes and catch fish behind other anglers. So that's going to be a really awesome class. We just had an advanced jerkbait seminar from Randy, and we're going to be doing another one of those in November. We're going to post that tomorrow. So if you do want to join Randy's advanced jerkbait seminar, I'll be posting that on the website tomorrow. And then I'm also going to be doing another advanced bass fishing electronics class on November 12th for those who are interested in really dialing in their electronics and learning when, where, and how to find fish with electronics, know if those fish are catchable, and really dial in your electronics game. And then another thing we have on the website are our Fish Moment Lake breakdowns. You guys have probably heard about these before. One thing I do want to call out is that we just added the Kentucky Lake Fall Map Breakdown. And for all those guys who are fishing the High School Fishing World Finals on Kentucky Lake this upcoming week, you can purchase this Kentucky Lake Breakdown. It is designed, we actually put it up here for the guys fishing that event, and it's going to give you a lot of really good areas and ideas on where to fish. All these breakdowns come with 60 different spots across 4 different areas of the lake by season of the year, and Randy is like churning these things out. There's so many of them on the website now, Randy. I was looking through it the other day. I'm shocked by how many maps we have up on the website. So congrats to getting all those out. You were kicking it. They take like 4 hours a piece, and Randy makes all these breakdowns, giving you really, really key spots on lakes all across the country that he's fished multiple times over 30 years of his professional experience. So that is basically what we have to offer there. So now let's jump back over to the stream, and I'm going to start talking about some offshore areas on these dirty water lakes. But before we get to that, we have a question from Francisco. He asks, what is a slack set, Randy?
A slack set is where, okay, say if you're fishing a worm or a jig or some type of slow bait, it's like you're made your cast out there and you're working it and you feel the bite and you reel down on the fish and you set the hook. And when you set the hook, there's a bow in your line, and when you set the hook, it snaps it back, almost like, say, if you took a rope, you held it between your hands and snapped it hard like that. You'd have that snap like that. What you want to do, you don't want to ever set the hook with loose line like that. When you get the bite, you want to reel down to the fish until you actually feel the fish pulling on the end of your rod, and then just pull back into it and reel at the same time. And that way it keeps driving that hook point home. It doesn't force the fish's mouth open, and you land a lot more fish like that.
And we can make a video on that too, guys, talking about proper hook set technique for shallow water and offshore fishing. I've been meaning to make a video on that for a while, and so we can throw one of those out. I think that'll be helpful for you guys. Also, got a comment from Billy Knowles. He says, Jonny, do you reply to your subs? I've been following you for a while, and I don't see you responding to a lot of comments or seeing a lot of replies lately. Guys, we get so many emails, messages, comments on everything every single day, and honestly, we just don't have the time in our day to produce content, to make what we need to do to make a living, and then also be able to respond to all the comments. We could literally spend an hour every single day just responding to YouTube comments and social media comments, and another hour answering emails. And at the end of the day, that doesn't leave us much time to do the things we need to do. So we try to respond the best we can, but it's not like we're ignoring you guys. We're trying to prioritize the things that are going to be able to help us, generate as much content for you guys, put out the free content on YouTube, and just give you the best quality content that we can. Anything else on that, Randy?
Yeah, I get the same question on that too, and it's just like Jonny said, man. We're working 24/7 on this. It's just, between that and then just life at home, it's just like it's so hard to get any time at all. But I try to read everything and comment when I can. But like I said, it's not that we're don't want to do it. It's just it's a total time deal on that.
For sure. We do read pretty much everything. So if don't think that we're missing your comments. We get feedback. I'm hearing, for example, people were mad about the clickbait thumbnails. We address that. We're not doing clickbait thumbnails. We take your feedback into account a lot of the time. So don't worry about the fact that we're not seeing your comments. We're seeing them. We just might not always have the time to sit down and type out a response. Because for me personally, I'm one of those people where if I'm going to type out a response, I want to sit down and put a lot of thought into it. And for me, that just kills my day. And I don't like doing half-baked responses. And so that's probably a personal thing too, where I could just say, yeah, thanks. But for me, I want to give you a whole, put some deep thought into it. So.
Well, another thing, God, we appreciate the comments. I mean, geez, it's to be that engaged and involved with what we're doing. Don't think that it's not, we're not grateful for it, because we're extremely grateful and appreciate it. And I'll try to step it up on my end. I'll try to get a little bit uh, more active there when I squeeze some minutes in here and there.
Yeah, I'll do the same thing. Again, we appreciate all the comments, guys, and all the interaction. We try to do the best we can with it. So appreciate that. And then one more question here before we talk about the offshore areas is from Chris Whalen. He asks, any tips for what to do when you run to the back of a creek and see shad and bass busting but can't get them to bite? That's something we experience all the time, Randy, on the lake.
Yeah.
Any tips on that?
That's one of the most frustrating things in fishing. And like I said, this time of year, those fish get so keyed in on the bait size that a lot of times it is very difficult to catch them. And there's two things about it. Number one, you have to get right there on them. It's like you got to be right on top of them when they bite. And another suggestion that I would give you on that, throw something small, like a little 1/4 ounce rattle trap, something like that, something finessey, little tiny small swim bait. If you're going to catch those fish that are busting those shad in the back, you're going to have your best bet with something real, real small.
Yeah, another suggestion is just to get out of the areas where you see bait fish everywhere. What that might mean is running further back into the back of creeks, going back out towards the main lake, running 5 or 6 miles up the lake, and getting away from the area that's covered in shad. A lot of guys think when there's shad everywhere, that's a good thing, because if there's shad there, there's bass there. Well, yes, but at the same time, those bass it's literally like an all-you-can-eat buffet with those bass. All they have to do is swim in a straight line and open their mouth, and they're going to be eating. So they don't have as much of an incentive to eat your bait over a live shad. So my strategy for personally is to just get out of those situations entirely, run around the lake until I find areas that have less shad, maybe still some shad present, but less shad. And some guys can be like, well, that's impossible. There's shad on every inch of the lake. And if that's the case, then what Randy suggests is definitely going to help. But in my experience, there's always an area of the lake where there's a smaller shad population where it's not overwhelming. You just have to take time to actually get on the big engine and run around the lake and find it.
Yeah, and when those shad are really small, that's when it gets really tough. Like on Beaver Lake today, I saw some shad in there that were like literally maybe not even an inch long, maybe like 3/4 of an inch long. And when they're that small, it's very difficult to catch those busting fish.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, let me start sharing my screen over here then, and I'm going to pull up, let's see here. I'm going to pull up Eufaula, and I'm going to talk about some offshore areas. And I'm going to talk about just generalities of fishing offshore in the fall on dirty water lakes. And I'm going to use Eufaula at its normal pool first. And then I'm also going to talk about Eufaula specifically and how it's 5 feet low and how that'll affect the fish.
Jonny, I want to say one thing before you get into that. And
yeah.
This is sort of a preface of what you're talking about. Little quick story here, guys. Jonny and I did an offshore challenge last Tuesday at Grand Lake, and he beat me again, deep versus shallow with the football head jig. And I had a guide trip the very next day, and I went out there, and Jonny, told me about what he did, and went out there with the football head jig at Grand Lake and just whacked them in 20 foot deep. I fished Grand Lake since 1969 with my dad, and I have never caught bass 20 foot deep in October on Grand Lake. And thanks to the information he's about ready to give you on offshore dirty water lakes, pay attention, because I saw it work myself yesterday.
Well, I appreciate the vote of confidence there, Andy. So yeah, that was a pretty cool deal. And really my deal on offshore fishing in the fall is that it's going to be tougher than in the summertime and even in the spring. Really, offshore fishing in the fall is the toughest time of the year to actually go catch them offshore. And the reason for that is because the bass are constantly moving. And let's just take this creek right here. This is Thomas Mill Creek. I don't know if that's the name of the creek. Yeah, Thomas Mill Creek. If you look at this creek, bass on any lake in the fall are going to be migrating back into these creeks. And what that does is it means that the bait fish are going to be moving and the bass are going to be constantly on the move. This is going to cause the fish to reposition very often, and it makes them a lot harder to pin down. They're not going to be sitting on one offshore spot like this little ledge or point right here, or maybe a creek channel bend right here, or maybe this shallow ledge right here. They're not going to stay there for a week like they might do in June or in late May. Instead, they might be here for a day or 2 days, and then they're going to leave, and they're going to keep moving. And they're going to be constantly shifting their position because they're going to be following the bait fish. As a result, you can't get so tied into spots, like fishing this point or this ledge or this hump or whatever it is in the fall. Instead, you have to be constantly on the move, following the bait fish into these creeks. What that means is that I am in the fall in these dirty water lakes not so focused on trying to find a specific spot. Instead, I'm trying to find a pattern. And what I'm trying to do is basically determine what section of the creeks the bass are going to be in. So for example, like on Grand Lake, when I went out there, my goal was to determine what section of the lake these bass were in. And what I determined when I was out on Grand was that they were in the first part of the creek, like this part of the creek here on Eufaula. And they were on the points on this part of the creek. Well, it was just as likely they may have been in the middle of the creek or the back of the creek and setting up offshore, but it just happened that they were in that stage of their fall progression, that they were in that first part of the creek sitting out in deeper water. Now, usually it's a pretty easy trail to figure out where they're moving. They're going to start here on the main river channel, right here, and they're going to be following that main river channel in general, not perfectly, but following along that main river channel in general, back into the creeks until they move all the way to the back of the creeks and disperse on their boat docks in shallow water. And that happens a lot of times in like November, late November, and that's when the offshore fishing gets really, really tough for me. And a lot of it is actually fishing in the backs of these creeks, fishing like isolated brush piles or stump rows in like 5 to 8 foot of water, or even like 3 foot of water, back in flats in the very backs of the creeks. That's kind of more the offshore fishing I do. We'll talk about that here in a second. But basically what I try to do is determine where the bait fish and the bass are in their progression into these creeks. So on Grand Lake, the fish were still in the first part of this creek here. And that might be where they are in Eufaula. Or they could be in the mid part of the creek or the back of the creek. Now, your next question would be, well, where do you look for these fish? Well, the way I think about it is that within this creek, there's going to be what I call stop signs, or basically like rest stops, kind of like if you're going to go to a gas station when you're driving down the highway. Here's your beginning of your destination, this main river channel where the fish might be in the summertime. And then you're going to be following that highway, which is your creek channel, all the way back, and your final destination is back here behind this bridge. Well, along the way, these bass need to take a pit stop, a rest stop, just like we do when we stop at a gas station. And they're going to refuel on bait fish, on food, just like people are going to refuel on gas. And what you'll find is that there's going to be different gas stations or pit stops along the way that are going to be your offshore structure, your ledges, your points, your humps. And usually those places are going to have some sort of cover on them, rocks, brush piles, something like that. And so what I'm doing is I'm just going to go through following this highway, the creek channels, looking for bait fish and looking for cover, like I mentioned in that offshore video, the whole step-by-step process of finding bass offshore. If you haven't watched that video, go watch it. I just posted it yesterday. It got like no views. Don't know why. It's one of the best videos I've ever put on the channel. So go watch that video after the stream. It's the complete process of offshore bass fishing. Basically, I'm going to follow this creek until I find these spots that have bait fish and they have the cover, whether it's rocks, stumps, brush piles. Now, what this means is that I'm not too concerned about the depth of water I'm looking in. For example, on Grand Lake, I was catching them in 20, 25 feet of water in the first week of October, but the third week of October, I could be catching them in 15 foot of water off a little shallow offshore point here. And this is obviously Eufaula, it's not Grand, but I'm talking generalities. And then when you get into early November, you might find that these fish are setting up more on these flats, and they're just on the edge of these flats where you have these sharp drop-offs. And they might be sitting only in 2, 3, 4 foot of water on like a stump row underwater right here, or a little brush pile. And then as you get into later November, they're way back in these creeks, and they're just on these short little turns, these short little flat points like this or up here. And they might be on small little rock piles or rock outcroppings, or maybe, again, stump rows in like, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 foot of water. And that's one thing that I will say about fall fishing is that I consider offshore fishing anytime I'm away from the bank. Anytime I'm not sitting against the shore. And so that might mean that I'm fishing 50 yards from the bank, but I'm still casting into like 2 or 3 foot of water. Now, for Randy, I feel like he still considers that shallow water fishing. But for me, I consider it offshore fishing because I'm literally off the shoreline. And I like to do a lot of fishing in the fall in 3, 4, 5 foot of water off the bank. Case in point, I was actually on one lake. I'll pull it up over here 1 second here. I'll pull up a recording or a map of this. I was actually on Lake Hudson, which is another shallow, dirty water lake here in Oklahoma. And I was just actually testing out my new 360 imaging. Give me 1 second here, guys. I'm just pulling up the map. Lake Hudson. And one of the spots I caught my fish was off a shallow offshore ridge. And actually, I broke off the fish. But it was off this really shallow offshore ridge in the mouth of this creek. And this is like last week. And I caught it off a stump off this flat that was in 2 foot of water. And I was cranking a square bill over top of it and actually broke off like a 5.5 pounder. I saw it jump and it broke my line. It was kind of a nightmare situation, but I was only fishing for a few hours and I got a fish off of a flat and a square bill in 2 foot of water. And I was way off the bank, way offshore. And a lot of times when you're fishing on these dirty water lakes, offshore and deep are not the same thing. If you think about offshore fishing and deep fishing as synonyms, then you are going to completely miss the ball in these dirty water, shallow lakes. Instead, you have to think about it as offshore fishing is any time you're away from the bank. So that might mean that you're fishing offshore, but you're fishing 2 feet of water offshore. That's where a lot of my best bites come in the fall. And so if I was on Eufaula, my goal would be to usually fish in one of these major creeks that is running off to the side. I would probably start down by the dam to start near the clearer water, and I would just follow these channels, these creek channels in, and I would start maybe on this deeper channel, checking some of these main river ledges and humps that guys might be fishing in the summer, and like over here, and then I'm going to move my way into the creeks and check in any sort of drop-offs and humps and structure, looking for rocks, brush, stumps, cover, and I might start looking in 20 foot of water, and I might end up looking in the back of this creek on a flat like this in 3 foot of water. And I'm just going to keep moving, keep grinding. And that whole time, my go-to baits in this situation are basically going to be some. So actually, one bait I've been loving, Randy, is one you gave me, is this Megabass Deep X 200 LBO crankbait. And you gave me one of these, and they are so good at not getting hung up in stumps. They haven't thrown this sexy French pearl. They don't get hung up because that bill is really long, and they have a really good action. It looks like it's a flat side crankbait, but it's actually pretty bulky. They don't have like a top view, and it has like a wide wobble to it. And it only dives, I think it says here on the package, it's supposed to dive 11 to 12 feet. I find on like 14-pound tests, it might dive 8 feet deep. And that's the perfect depth bait for when I'm fishing on like a flat or something like this, or over here on Eufaula, when I'm trying to crank flats and ledges and stuff in 6, 7, 8 foot of water. And I've thrown a bunch of different crankbaits before, but this one is like the best for getting unhung that I've found. So big fan of this crankbait here, just for covering water. But I'll also throw like a 6XD crankbait, a square bill crankbait. I throw a lot of crankbaits on these dirty, shallow water lakes in the fall, especially as these fish get further back into the creeks. When they're still out in the main lake, that's when I'm still throwing a football jig, a flutter spoon, hair jig, stuff like that. But as they start sliding more into the creeks, I'm throwing a lot more crankbaits, and I'm also going to be throwing shaky heads, just like a black shaky head, zoom trick worm. That's kind of going to be my deal. And again, I'm going to check every single creek. I'm going to figure out which one has the best population of offshore bass. And it might take me a little while to find the right section of the lake that we talked about at the beginning of the stream that's holding good offshore bass. This creek might not be holding good offshore bass, or this one, but then when you get to this creek, this one is the perfect creek. There seemed to be a good concentration of offshore bass in here, and maybe I can pull in here and catch them off all of these little turns and swings and whatever are in here. So that's my process. Kind of very high level there, but it doesn't really change either with the low water level. If you look at it, you can look at this lake and see that when you're fishing offshore, the only difference is if it's 5 feet low, all the spots that say 7 foot of water are going to be 2 foot of water. And that doesn't really change my approach at all. It's just going to mean that there's less water up here, and I'm just going to maybe not go as far back in the creek. But I'm not so worried about water level in this situation. I'm more worried about section of the creek, first third, middle, back of the creek. I'm worried about the bait fish population, and I'm worried about the available cover. So that's all I got, Randy, on the dirty waterfall lakes. So how's that sound to you?
Yeah, Jonny made a good point there when he's talking about offshore and relationship to deep or shallow water, because on a lot of the lakes that have the dirty water in the fall time of the year, I mean, they tend to be more of the lowland lakes. There can be some highland, but most of the time they tend to be flatter lowland lakes. And offshore is all relative because, it's just like you said, some of the places you fish, they could be rock flats that go way out there, and it could be 3 or 4 foot deep, 100 yards off the bank. Even though that's shallow, that's still offshore. But here's another area I want to show everybody that's really good in the fall time of the year on, just a lot of different lakes that you fish. One of my favorite type of places to go to in the fall time of the year when the water's low is the back end of coves off the main lake. Now, I like them better, the short coves that are like maybe even like small bays, but little short coves like this. When the water's low, and particularly when you start to get in towards later October, when that water temperature starts to get down, in that 60-degree range, there's a large concentration of bass that will move into the very backs of these flat cuts, and they don't have to have any cover in them at all. It can be mud bank, it can be gravel, it could be, in fact, that's what I prefer, is like a mud or gravel type bank in the backs of here. And these fish will set on these bare nothing banks in 2 to 3 foot of water, even if it's shallow out in the middle. And one of the best techniques that you can have in late October, early November in off-colored water is to take a rattle trap or any type of vibrating, crankbait that you have, but the small size, like the 1/4 ounce. And what I do is I go back into these real shallow flat bays. I'm talking about places that you'd be, your trolling motor's kicking up mud. And I put that 1/4 ounce vibrating bait like on 20-pound test line where the thing won't get down very deep. Throw it out there all the way to the bank, boats in 2 or 3 foot of water, and I fan cast the back of these flat coves with that little rattle trap on the heavy line. And this is a really good technique, not only to catch, just fish, but to catch good ones. I mean, you can catch good ones doing this, and it's something you can really pattern. But like I said, when you're looking for this type of water, it's it's better. It's like this one here. This is a creek, and it flattens out in the back. And yeah, the creek can be good too. But I'm more specifically looking for like these little short, bay cuts off the main lake with no cover in them. I don't want any wood. I don't want any laydowns, mud, gravel, shallow water. It works all over the country. I've caught them everywhere, from Lake Murray doing that all the way back west, down south, everywhere. So magic depth, once that water temperature gets around that 60-degree mark, try that little vibrating bait.
And question for you, Randy, why do they move back in those creeks? The question was, is it because like the sun or the heat, or is it? I would assume it's because the bait fish are moving back in there from all the fall runoff and stuff. That would be my.
Let's go to. I know we're on Eufaula here, but can we scroll out to Stockton Lake,
Yeah,
Jonny?
yeah.
Get an example.
Head over there.
Okay, to answer that question, there's a couple different things here. Let's go to Stockton Lake back here in Missouri, which is one of my favorite fall lakes to fish when the water's low. And I'm going to give you guys an example here.
And Stockton isn't necessarily a dirty water lake. It is in the northern portion, but it could be clear and dirty, kind of.
Yeah. Let's take, for example, if you go up either the Sac River or the Suns Creek up here, you're going to have some of these short coves off the main lake that are going to be, it's going to be a little bit more off colored. You're going to have maybe 12 inches of visibility in there. But there's a couple different things that go on in here. Number one, you have the shad back in there. But number two, There's something about when the water, and this is what's key on the thing. When the water falls hard in the fall time of the year, and you have a combination of falling water, stained water, and water temperatures that are down the upper 50s, these bass just migrate to the back of these type of areas. I don't care, like I said, if you're on Eufaula, if you're in Stockton or whatever. It's just everything's right. If the water level's normal, say if it's like a foot below pool, these fish won't be back in here. But you get a lake level that's down 3 or 4 feet, and that water, those cooler nights come in, those shads start migrating to the back of these things. You'll see them back on the surface here. You'll see some in the middle of the cove. These bass don't want to have anything to do with this part of the cove or the points or anything like that. They're in the very, very back, in little groups, 2 and 3 back there. And it's something that lasts for a short period of time, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and it's over. Once that water temperature starts getting down, into the 50s, and it starts getting down into the 30s at night, those fish start making their way back out. But right now around the country, we're right in the heart for this type of water in here.
Awesome. And thanks for that question, Kylie. I saw your response on the pronunciation. Hopefully I got that right. That's good stuff there, Randy. And in general, in the fall, it seems like you're focused way more on the backs of the creeks and pockets, coves. I'm focused on the creeks as well, but if you look at all the areas, like the area you have pulled up there, it's these very narrow areas where I like to look for a little bit more wider, flatter areas, and that is something that is definitely a call out. When I'm fishing offshore, I like to find flatter, more open areas because I can use my electronics to find those fish. Randy, on the other hand, though, it's probably a little more difficult for you to eliminate water in those wide, open, flat creeks because there's so much cover and those fish will spread out. So instead, you go to the very steeper, or like maybe not super steep, but the steeper, narrower cuts and pockets and creeks. Is that in general correct?
Yeah, and a lot of this, Johnny, it has to do with the water clarity. Because let me give you guys an example here. We're back on Stockton, and like I said, this area at Stockton, if you saw one of the video that Johnny and I did at Stockton, this is the area that I caught him in, and you're talking 6 inches of visibility right here, even though it's a highland lake. Okay, now these fish right here, like I said, they're going to be in these type of areas. But if you go out on Stockton, let's say on the lower end of the lake, and you go back into these same type of areas, the backs of these coves here, like here, you're going to have the water visibility is going to be 4 feet deep, and these fish are not going to be back in here. These fish right here, this time of year, they're going to be out on these main lake points right here, and I may catch them on a topwater lure, or burning a spinner bait, something in the clear water. So there's just a lot of different things going on. But the reason that I like those narrower areas is simply because of the water clarity. I want the dirty water. I'm looking for the off-colored water, and which is the topic of today's deal. And like I said, it's not just Eufaula. We picked Eufaula because it's a stained water lake, but you can go to any lake around, and if you go up into the creek arms and the river arms, you're going to get into some off-colored water. I mean, almost without exception on any lake that you go to.
For sure. And one really good comment or question here from Keith. He says, what about the opposite situation if the water on your lake is up a few feet over the past year or two? So fall fishing with a high water situation. In the fall time of the year, that's very rare. You don't usually have high water in the fall because you're going to have like lake drawdown stuff. But actually last year on Grand Lake, the lake was up like a couple feet still because it was so high all year. And it was actually basically 1.5 feet high in the bushes in November, which is very, very strange. And one thing that I always tell guys is if you're on a dirtier water lake, this is kind of Grand Lake in this midsection had like maybe 1.5 feet, 2 foot of visibility on the main river channel because it was just really muddy that year. What I looked for is I went back into these creeks, and my number one deal on any lake in the fall is if I can find some sort of aquatic vegetation, whether that's bank grass, eelgrass, water willow, floating grass, whatever kind of grass I can find. If there's grass in the lake, that's where I am going in the fall because that is always the most consistent bite for me. And so back in this creek back here on Grand, there were actually areas of bank grass that were flooded in the back of these pockets and here and here and here on these shallow little cuts. And I crushed them just fishing a spinnerbait and a swim jig in shallow flooded grass in the fall. And a lot of times, like on Lake Dardanelle, for example, which is one of my home lakes, whenever you do have grass in the lake, for example, like over here in Delaware Bay, it's a shallow, dirty water lake. A lot of times there's really good bank grass or a really good, coontail grass that grows here some years. And you can absolutely wreck them out of the coontail with a chatterbait, with a loopless crankbait, a swim bait, stuff like that. And you can also catch them really well just flipping a water willow this time of year, just around all the Illinois Bayou and Piney Creek and stuff area. And so if the water is up, I love fishing water willow, any sort of aquatic vegetation. We're actually going to be doing our live stream specifically on grass lakes in the fall because that's a whole other category. The lakes we're talking about here are not grass lakes. They're just lakes that have a little bit of grass in them versus like a TVA lake where there's grass everywhere, which we've talked about a little bit, but more so like, southern grass fisheries as well as those northern grass fisheries in the fall. We'll do another stream on that, but what are your thoughts on all that with a high water situation in the fall, Randy? Oh, before you do that too, sorry, 1 second. Dylan, thank you for the $4.99 super chat. Appreciate that. Okay, go ahead, Randy.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with how high the water actually is because here's my deal, what I found in fall fishing. I either want the water really low or I want it abnormally high. I don't like it at all when it's like at full pool where there's not enough water in like the flooded cover to put the fish back up in there, but it's too high to see a lot of the stuff that's isolated. So for me, like on Stockton Lake, for example, here, the worst scenario on this lake is when the lake is like at normal level in the fall. I want that lake 2 or 3 feet down or 2 or 3 feet over normal because when it's okay, if it's 2 or 3 feet low, those fish are going to be pulling to the back of these coves on the flats I were talking about. But if it's 2 or 3 feet high, these fish will be in the same area, like in the flooded bushes and the flooded trees, and I'll catch them flipping. Same is true for Lake Eufaula. Let's scroll back out and I'll show you Lake Eufaula what I mean by that. If the water at Eufaula, and we already talked about it low, but if the water at Eufaula is abnormally high, what you're going to have, get a couple areas here, is these fish are going to move back into these flats. You can see there's listed emergent vegetation here. These flats off the main river, you're going to have, a foot or maybe even 2 foot of water in a lot of the gator grass and water willows back in here. And that's when you can just do really good, like on a swim jig, buzz bait, chatterbait, that type of stuff. Puts those fish really shallow. And one of the things that you'll notice about fall fishing, which is one of the reasons I like it, is when you have rising water in the fall, the good fish, the quality fish, will move into that flooded cover quicker than they will any other time of the year. If the water comes up real fast in the springtime of the year when the water temperature is still in the 50s or 60s, the good fish will stay on that old shoreline and not move up into that flooded cover real quick. The smaller fish are the first fish that move up into flooded cover, whether it be like the bank grass in Eufaula or the bushes on Stockton Lake. But in the fall time of the year, they will follow that water up immediately. I'm talking 3 and 4 pounders and will stay up in there until that water falls out completely. So rising water in the fall time of the year is one of my favorite times to catch them, as long as that water temperature is over 60 degrees.
For sure, I completely agree. And that's the one time of the year I'm not fishing offshore. If you have high water in the fall, I am in the bushes too. It's hard to catch fish offshore, quality fish offshore, when that lake is high and rising in the fall. It's better off just don't fight it. Just go up shallow, find that flooded cover. And question from Cameron asks, what about lakes with zero grass? If your lake doesn't have any grass, you can still catch fish in flooded bushes, flooded laydowns, trees. One thing I would say is that in the fall, a lot of guys don't fish shallow enough late enough in the year. I find that I can still catch fish in December when water temperatures are in the low 50s in 6 inches of water on a spinnerbait and a crankbait, super, super shallow. Even a buzzbait, super shallow in the fall, especially if you have high water, but even if you have low water. Those fish will get dirt shallow even into December, even when the water temperatures are 50 degrees. So don't start pulling offshore and trying to think you have fish deep when the water temperatures hit 50. Honestly, I find that I catch them better in 6 inches to 2 feet of water in December than I do fishing in 15 to 20 foot of water.
Yeah, a lot of it also has to do with what you consider higher water, because some lakes they fluctuate a lot more than others. For example, Lake Eufaula, it doesn't fluctuate that much. I mean, you're talking about Lake Eufaula, or even like Lake of the Ozarks here in Missouri. You're talking about a 2 foot fluctuation is a major deal any time of the year. But if you take a lake like Bull Shoals, something like that, it's nothing for that lake to fluctuate 20 or 30 feet in a year. So when you're dealing with like falling water or rising water in the fall time, it's all relative to the how much it actually rises and falls, and it's all relative to how that water visibility changes with that rise. Because what happens is, you take a lake like Lake of the Ozarks, if you get say you get one of those deals where it's just a freak deal where you get 6 or 7 inches of rain in a week, a lot of water coming back into the creeks. Since they want to keep that lake at a normal level, they suck it down, and it creates dirty water from one end of the lake to the other. And what happens in that environment, it puts those big fish right on the bank, even on the lower end of the lake, where they would never be in that specific situation. And that's the way it is on other lakes like Lake Eufaula too. They do not let these lakes get high. They rip the current through there, and in doing so, those fish will get on the bank. They don't have to have cover to relate to. They're on whatever hard cover they can have, riprap, rock banks, anything that breaks the current, that type of thing. So every lake and of course the natural lakes even have less than that. So it's all relative to how much your lake fluctuates in not only water level but water clarity.
Yeah, and one other thing too on any of these lakes, guys, we've gotten to that a lot of discussion on the water fluctuation. One thing I found is that some of the best places to fish offshore, or just in general in the fall, is whenever that lake drops, especially if you get a lake that drops 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 feet, look for the offshore brush piles and offshore man-made structure that people have created, or cover that people have put out there, whether it's tires or brush piles or pallets or whatever people drop out there. I catch so many fish on Lake Hamilton when there's like a 7 foot or 6 foot drawdown, or however low it gets, and I will just catch them just flipping brush piles that are normally in 7, 8, 10 foot of water, like crappie tops. And that's a great way to catch some big fish in the fall. So with that falling water, I say that falling water in the fall is actually better. When your lake is 10 foot below normal pool, you have a better chance catching them in the fall than when it's at normal pool. The only exception is when you maybe have it 2 feet high, like Randy's talking about. So don't get discouraged regardless of water fluctuation. Like, water fluctuation in the fall, for me, has the least impact on the fish, on the quality of the fishing, at least, any time of the year. I think those fish are on the move so much that if the water's high or low or whatever, it's not going to have a super adverse effect on them. There's some way to catch them in the fall, regardless of what your water level is. You just have to find those fish. I would say that if your lake is 5 foot low, it's not going to make the fishing any harder than if it's 10 foot low, or if it's 3 foot low versus 6 foot low. The fishing is going to be comparable. You just have to locate where the fish are. They're just going to be set up differently in different places. You can't just go to your community holes, or you can't fish history. And that's what a lot of people do. They fish history and they're like, man, all my best points are out of the water. What do? Well, you got to fish the moment, and then you can go catch them. Sound about right, Randy?
That's exactly right. That's probably the most important statement to remember in fishing, for sure.
Yeah,
but sure. No, fall fishing, like I said, it's, I've always said it's some of the toughest times of the year to fish. But man, I just love fishing in the fall time of the year, because it's like, it's totally unique. Every lake's different. It's constantly changing. It's dynamic. And if you fish all fall long, like, I don't hunt, so a lot of people that hunt, they don't get experience this whole progression. But if you start fishing like in early September and you work your way all the way to December, you can see how predictable that fall fishing and how you can pattern these fish are. And it's like I said, we used to have a lot of our tournaments in the fall. We don't so much anymore, but it's just a great time to be on the water, man.
For sure, definitely. Maybe I know for those guys who are hunters, they're not going to miss a single day in the deer stand or whatever season they're trying to get. They're not going to miss it. So, for those of you who are here and are interested in fall fishing, you guys, you're our guys. We both, Randy and I, fish in the fall a lot. It's a fun time of year to fish. One thing I'll just say is that you don't get too caught up into one specific spot, one specific area. Move with the fish. Locate bait fish. If you get into an area that's covered in bait fish and there's bait fish everywhere, run to an area with less bait fish, but that still has some bait fish available. Fish the moment, try a bunch of different stuff, and once you start landing on them, try to repeat that pattern. We're going to be showing you guys a ton of that stuff going forward here, and there's going to be a lot of videos coming up on different lakes. We're going to be fishing on lakes all across this area, Grand Lake, Beaver Lake, Table Rock. We're going to maybe even go some grassy lakes over here in Oklahoma, something like that. We'll try to experiment with a bunch of different stuff to give you guys a different feel for how to catch fish in the fall. And hopefully you guys are going to be able to learn from our shallow versus offshore challenges, and hopefully Randy will be able to take a win in one of these sometime soon, because it's this offshore game. People are going to stop fishing up shallow, Randy, if you don't start winning some of these challenges. I'm just kidding.
Man, every time we go out, I think, man, am I gonna take him today? Am I gonna beat him? And it's like, it just hadn't happened yet. We've been close, and if I can just capitalize on all those bites, like today, if I'd have capitalized my bites, it would have been a different story. But it's just you gotta maximize your bites 100% when you're fishing shallow water, because you just don't have the opportunities like you do offshore with them.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, one more thing here before we move on is I want to just remind you guys some of the stuff that we have going on fishthemoment.com. So again, we have our Fish Moment map breakdowns. You get 60 different spots across 4 different areas of the lake. We have lakes broken up by season, and we have lakes all across the country. Randy puts like 4 hours into all these maps, and I have no idea how he kicks out all these maps so quickly. He's a rock star at these, and he is given information on lakes that he has personal experience on. So he's fished all these lakes. He knows what the deal is. He knows how to find the fish on these lakes in the best spots. So definitely check out these maps if you are struggling on one of the lakes. We also offer personal map breakdowns. We sell them out like every single Monday. We restock. Randy can only do 4 a week. He does have to sleep. And so there's 4 available each week, and they are available every Monday is when I refresh them. So definitely check out these personal map breakdowns if your lake isn't available. And then we also have some upcoming virtual seminars that you may have heard about. First one is the Advanced Offshore Bass Fishing Seminar, where I'm going to be talking about how to determine the best times to fish offshore, understanding how the conditions, weather conditions, lake conditions, currents, fishing pressure, how all those factors affect offshore bass, how to hit proper offshore fishing timing, how to find hidden offshore areas, and also how to maximize fish off of community holes. So a lot of stuff that I haven't covered yet in my YouTube videos, and most of the content here is not going to be repetitive of what I've talked about on the live stream or YouTube before. So definitely check out the seminar if you want to take your offshore fishing game to the next level. I'm also going to be offering an advanced offshore bass fishing electronics class. So if you do want to learn more about bass fishing electronics, that'll be on November 12th. And this always fills up. I've done 3 of them so far, and they always fill up like 2 weeks before. So definitely check this out if you want to learn more about your electronics. And I'm also going to be posting another advanced jerkbait fishing seminar that Randy will be doing in November once he returns from all the opens. And we're just trying to nail down times on that. Once we do, we'll post that. And this one was a huge success. This is already passed, actually, and it's filled up. But I'll be posting another one for November. And Randy was actually one of the original designers of the Megabass Vision 110, the most popular jerkbait in the market, so he knows his stuff on jerkbaits. So yeah, that is that. So Randy, anything else you want to share before we close up for the night?
Yeah, I'll just leave everybody with a couple little fall tips on these stained water lakes. For me, in my own personal experience, when you have water visibility less than 2 foot in the fall, water temperatures in the 50s to around 70 degrees, you're going to do a lot better with your moving baits, unless you have water that's clearer than 2 feet. But stay with your shallow crankbaits, your small spinner baits. Downsize everything. Quarter-ounce buzz baits. You're going to get a lot more bites if you go to just take it down a notch. And also stick with your shad patterns. If you're throwing crankbaits, chatterbaits, spinnerbaits, stay with, this is the time of year I don't use many chartreuses or perches. So downsize, go to shad patterns, fish moving baits, and just stay in the type of water we talked about tonight. And I think that'll, add up to some success for you guys.
Awesome, good stuff. And then we actually got a really good recap from Cody Arnold here. He said, recap, Randy would start in the upper end of the lake during the fall, focusing on coves off the river channel. Correct, you would also go way up the creek arms until they narrow down to like literally being like 2 boat lengths wide. So the very, very backs of skinny creeks. That's where Randy will focus. And then Jonny will focus on the lower end, working river channels back into major tributaries. That is right, looking for structure spots and stuff following the creek channels. So that's a good start. And then would either of you start mid-lake in dirty water? Normally I don't. If I'm going on a fishery in the fall, I start on the lower end if I'm fishing offshore, and Randy likes to fish more on the upper end, so that's kind of where we go. I don't fish a lot of mid-lake in the fall unless I have a lot of mixture of water visibility where it's like clear and dirty. If it's all dirty, I stay more towards the southern end. Or like the clear water? What do you do, Randy?
Well, one thing that I found is it depends on the structure of the lake. I'll tell you one thing as far as a mid-lake area. If you're fishing a lake that has a lot of rock in it and not a lot of other type of cover, and you have that water visibility in that, say that 15 inches to 2 foot zone, water temperatures down in the mid 60s, that is one situation where you can catch them in the mid part of the lake if it falls into that scenario. So other than that, I'm up the lake most of the time. You got to eliminate something. That's the thing about bass fishing, is you can't do everything. And the more water that you eliminate, the less intimidating it is to you. You can get more intimate with your area. And that's another thing I want to reiterate too about fall fishing is when you finally get into an area and you start getting some bites and you know that you have enough area and you have enough cover in that particular area to hold a good population of fish, just slow down and spend a lot of time in there looking, graphing, fishing, experimenting with colors, experimenting with baits. And when you come out of there, tell yourself, I know this area better than anyone else. There's nobody else that understands how this area is laid out and how the personality and the mood of the fish. And that is a big key to being successful this time of year.
Completely agree with that, Randy. And I think that's really, really key in general whenever you're fishing in the fall. If you find a 200-yard to 1 mile section of the lake where you're getting bit, focus on the area. Don't run around a ton because it's so hard to relocate these fish that once you find an active section and you kind of find an active pattern, stick with that area and maximize it. Great tips there, Randy. One last thing I saw from Marshall. A couple of people are asking about the Fish at the Moment offshore jig. They're have been out of stock for a very, very long time. Jewel's still working on getting restocked on the skirts. We're trying to keep updated with the supplier. The situation, guys, from overseas on any sort of product right now is ridiculous. If you guys have walked into any fishing tackle supplier store, Academy Sports, Bass Pro Shops, whatever, you'll know the shelves are completely empty. And it's just because most of these parts are produced overseas, and that's what's happening with this skirt for the Fish Moment offshore jig. We have a very custom skirt on this jig, and we weren't expecting demand to be as high as it was. We sold out actually of all the skirts within like 36 hours. Which is ridiculous. And so we are waiting on the skirts. Once we do, we are going to ship out all those orders, and then we are going to, I'll let you guys know when they're back in stock and you can actually start ordering them again. And then we're also going to be putting out just the Fish Moment offshore jig head as well once we get back in stock and cover all initial orders. I think that'll be really cool. I throw the head just itself with like a swim bait, and with like a grub, stuff like that. So just a call out there, and I'll be keeping you guys updated as best I can as I communicate with Jewel on this. kind of bummed with the, situation on the supply out of our control. This bait, though, Randy, I've been crushing them on this bait. So once it gets back in stock, you guys need to check this out because it is honestly, it's my number one bait by far. And I catch more fish on this than any other bait times 10, it seems like.
Yeah, there's been two keys baits for Jonny and I for the past 3 or 4 months. Mine has been that Mega Bass Z2 crankbait.
Yep.
I've caught them everywhere we went on it, and yours has been the football head jig. That's been our two main damage doers there.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because we have really found that niche. And I talked to Randy about that today. I just need to literally just put a Fish Moment offshore jig in my hand and just throw it all day long. And if I do that, I probably have a better chance of catching them than doing pretty much anything just because I have so much confidence in it. And it's almost the same with you, Randy. If you just stick that Z2 crank in your hand, you're going to probably do better than doing pretty much anything else just because, one, you have the confidence in it, but also they're just really, really good baits for that late summer, early fall time of year that we've been in recently.
Yeah, it's the type of water we look for. I mean, I look for that type of water with a bite, that crankbait, and you looking for the offshore jig, and that's the great thing about fishing. There's always more than one way to catch them. I mean, and everybody out there. Some people like fishing off the bank. Some people like pounding the bank. So that's the great thing about fall. There's more than one way to get them out there.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, guys, I see there's a few more comments on here. Some about doing specific lakes and specific areas. We try not to do that because once we answer one person's question about a specific lake, then you guys know how it is. Everyone wants us to answer a question about a specific lake. So we try not to do that just because it just sets a bad precedent going forward. So hope you understand that. And just specific areas. We try to answer as many generic questions as we can. They're relevant to everyone on the stream. And that's just the way that we decide to do it. But if you do have any specific questions on that, we do offer one-on-one virtual lessons on fishthemoment.com that you can sign up for, where you can actually spend an hour talking with me about offshore fishing, about fishing specific lakes, strategy, stuff like that. And Randy also offers on-the-water fishing lessons. And so if you do want to actually go out on the lake with Randy, and you could go to one of these lakes in our area, a Truman, Stockton, lakes like that, Randy can actually go on the lake with you and teach you all the tactics you need to learn. So you can sign up for those on fishmoment.com and book with Randy here. And then you can also sign up for a virtual video lesson with me. It's a 1-hour lesson, and I go through on Google Earth and everything with you and talk through everything you know about your lake. I can help you with tournament prep, all kinds of stuff. And I have reviews here. I need to update this reviews page. I haven't done that in a little bit. We've been so busy with everything going on. But here are just some of the reviews. I haven't updated this since June, Randy. This just shows how busy we are. There's just some things that we just can't get to because we're literally we are going nonstop, guys. You have no idea. It's crazy, but we love it for sure.
Yeah, and like I said, for me, you throw a 3-year-old, a 7-year-old, and 11-year-old on top of it, and there's just not time for hardly nothing else in there. But one of the things I'll say with that is, I'm filming all of my practice and tournaments for the Bassmaster Opens. We're going to be coming out with that probably over the next month or two. There's a lot of content, a lot of material there. I go in how I break my practice down, thoughts, analyzations before the tournament, after the tournament, during the tournament. So I think it's pretty interesting as far as, learning. You can follow along and learn from my mistakes, learn from the things I did right, and might help you guys catch some more fish too that way.
Yeah, those are some awesome videos. We'll be putting those out once Randy gets back from the next couple opens. We're going to get all that footage from him, and we're going to dump a bunch of open practice and tournament videos from Randy. So that should be really good. And also from Mike, he's asking us to just make sure we update the podcast library. I'm working on that this week. That's on my to-do list. I'm actually going to try to drop a ton of the old live streams and some of the Rick Clunn videos and other videos we do, and hopefully get, over the next couple months, get 50 to 100 podcasts type content on the podcast app so you guys can listen to that, go into the lake, listen to old live streams you may have missed. I'm going to go back actually to old time, beginning live streams, and start throwing those up that you guys may have not heard before. And I don't even know what I'm going to sound like. I'm like, hey guys, Fish the Moment here. Let's look at some maps. Don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what that sounds like. That's just that's my impersonation of myself from 2.5 years ago. we'll see how that goes. Anyways, Randy, appreciate you joining me again for the stream. Appreciate everyone for tuning in, sticking with us on a Tuesday night. And we will be posting this live stream onto YouTube if you want to go back and rewatch or do anything like that. And other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed the stream. Randy, any last comments?
Yeah, thanks again, everybody, for following tonight and being part of the podcast. Much appreciated. Like I said, we just every week we get on this thing, and I'm just really humbled about everybody that supports us. All the comments we get, much appreciated once again.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Really appreciate all the support, and we'll see you guys next week. Randy's actually going to be at the Open, so I'm going to be flying solo. I might try to get in there a guest like Matt Pancraft from BTL. I know he's going to be at a tournament, but I might try to get a guest on. Everyone's fishing tournaments right now, so it might just be me. You might get me talking to the camera for an hour, breaking down offshore areas. Who knows? Leave a comment down below in this YouTube video, or when you get off the stream, just go to the YouTube video. Leave a comment about what you might want me to talk about in a solo live stream. I haven't done one of those in a while, so it'll be kind of fun. So anyways, thanks again, guys, and we'll see you next week.